Hi, this is part 4 of my Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition core book review. This time I'm going to go deeper into the sects of the kindred. During the first nights, after the 13 grandchildren of Cain stopped leaving their respective clans because they retreated into hiding to pursue their own objectives and agendas, the rest of the vampires remained somewhat adrift, not exactly sure of how things would proceed without these more powerful older vampires leading them. So, at first, there weren't any sects. Each clan tried to advance and tried to fulfill different objectives, carry out different plans. But later on, they noticed that they needed to band together. Not all of the clans agreed in a general sense, so this is why sects came into being. Even bloodlines from specific clans sprouted forth of these divisions due to the formation of sects. Now let's talk about some of the sects, because the true Black Hand is covered in another book, in the Bloodlines book if I'm not mistaken, but here you have information on the Camarilla, on the Sabbat, and the Anarchs and the independent clans. Something that seems somewhat plausible to me when it comes to the Camarilla and the Sabbat is that both of these powerful sects came into being as a product of fear and perhaps great necessity. You could say that the Camarilla was born out of a fear of the inner clan conflict, or conflict in general during the darkest moments of the clans. And you could say that the Sabbat was born out of fear of the eventuality of Gehenna, of that vampire apocalypse that nobody was sure when it was going to happen. Now, let's talk about the Camarilla and how they came into being and how they are handling things in present times. The Camarilla, also known as the Ivory Tower, was a way to organize vampires so they wouldn't kill each other. It was born during the 15th century because there was the War of the Princes before that, and during this time many vampires killed other vampires and it was total chaos. They also had to deal with the Inquisition, so they became aware that they needed to band together. Not all of the 13 clans agreed to join the Camarilla, because there were two clans that were quite, I guess you could say, worried and afraid at the same time that Gehenna would come to pass or happen, and they wouldn't be ready for it. So they took that as the priority, while the Camarilla dismissed such eschatological views and decided to focus on create a workable or efficient vampire society or civilization. So some kindred joined into the Camarilla. The Camarilla accepts all vampires within the sect. You could say that this is a positive thing, because the Camarilla would offer a certain degree of order and protection to almost any vampire in a particular region under the auspices or governance of the Camarilla. However, this also means that the Camarilla feels entitled to give you orders and to control you, because you belong to the Camarilla whether you like it or not. So the Camarilla has traditions and laws and regulations as their priority. In a way, they feel like an attempt of global dominance on the part of the kindred. And they respect things such as the age of vampires, that is, the older vampires have a higher hierarchy, and they also respect prestige and accomplishments. So in that sense, they feel a bit elitist. So it's not that easy to go up the ranks of the Camarilla. And in part 3 of my review, I spoke about other things related to titles and the hierarchy and position in vampire society, specifically in the Camarilla. So here we're just focusing on how Camarilla came to be and how many clans became part of the Camarilla, more than anything for security, because despite being somewhat authoritarian at times, the Camarilla does offer a certain degree of protection so that the conflicts in Jihad aren't as chaotic or bloody as they could be otherwise. The Camarilla considers the Sabbat to be their enemies, because the Sabbat represent more like an apocalyptic cult with firm roots in mortal religious traditions, while the Camarilla is almost completely focused on the civilization aspect of being kindred. But of course, this creates some conflict within the Camarilla, as the Sabbat gains more support, as there is more talk of the thinning of vampire blood and different signs of Gehenna coming soon. Some younger vampires consider that perhaps the Sabbat is right, and they start to gravitate towards the Sabbat. So the elders of the Camarilla feel a bit hard-pressed to get new members or to get the advantage, be it technological, political, social advantage, etc., or something related to vampire disciplines. So it's not easy for the Camarilla, even though they feel like a powerful government of vampires. In this core book, you have information on the practices of the Camarilla, on the traditions, and how the prince is addressed or communicated with during different gatherings. They feel like different ways in which vampires come together in councils, in meetings, in parties that are actually political gatherings in disguise to decide the fate of the kindred. But of course, there is also a lot of corruption and power plays in these gatherings. And there's also the consideration of who is appointed as primogen, or the judicators or archons. So it's the Camarilla sometimes takes a bit too long before acting, because they have to deal with all of this organizational process that feels quite bureaucratic at times. You could say that the conclaves are the center of global Camarilla politics, but it's quite difficult to find different members of high kindred society that agree on different matters, and this is something that is exploited by other sects, as I was telling you, like the Sabbat or the Anarchs. So the Camarilla is always thinking on the long term, but sometimes they miss the finer details of taking action soon enough. So security has become tighter and tighter during modern nights, with concerns about their enemies. And it's somewhat worrisome that key elders get out of touch with the modern world and do not take into consideration the technological and ideological advantages of the modern knights. When it comes to the Sabbat, they view the Camarilla as if they are weak and they are not prepared for the final nights that come with Gehenna. And the Anarchs, that could be considered a subsect or a sect within the Camarilla, they grow tired and find the Camarilla annoying, because they look a bit like psychotic, power-hungry assholes, as they call them. I am not kidding, that's the way the book describes them, surrounded by mindless sycophants that hope that political power comes from the end. It's quite vulgar the way they put it here, but you can say that the Anarchs are not happy with the Camarilla. And then the Independents, they consider the Camarilla like a business opportunity, although the independents are ready to see if the Camarilla topples down to side with the Sabbat if it's more profitable to them. Now, when it comes to the Sabbat, they feel a lot like a religious cult. Like I said in my other, in the part 3 of my review, they are also known as the Sword of Cain because they are focused completely on the prophecy, on Gehenna, on how these very powerful vampires, the antediluvian vampires, will rise, and sometimes Methuselah are already plotting and planning against many objectives of the kindred during the jihad. So the Sabbat embrace their bestial natures as vampires almost completely. They want to rule over humanity. They want the planet to be completely under the control of vampires, and they consider the Camarilla to be quite weak because they are trying to get along with humans, always taking advantage of humans, of course. That is, the Camarilla drink their blood, and they want to have the upper hand all the time over mortals, but still the Camarilla consider the humans like something that they need to coexist in a certain diabolic harmony, sorry. But the Sabbat see that they consider humans to be just cattle and just like that, and they should be ruled like tyrants over them. So the Sabbat are somewhat chaotic, despite acting as packs or cult groups in the loosest sense of order or hierarchy. The Sabbat try to rule with an iron fist, and they care little for their actions. Most of the places ruled by the Sabbat are places of crime and violence and death. So it's quite difficult to see what types of crimes and grisly murders were committed by vampires or by mortals. It's not exactly the best place, and the Sabbat like it like that because they want to create chaos in cities so that they can rule over humans. They want to bring down the status quo through their cult objectives. And this, of course, manages to pull a lot of violent individuals towards their clans. Many people that when they were alive they had violent tendencies, they get embraced by the Sabbat. In fact, some of the more macabre rituals of the Sabbat involve embracing someone and hitting them in the head with a shovel and burying them alive, or rather undead, so that they have to claw their way out of their grave. Now, this seems quite horrifying. In fact, those that have gone through this sort of ritual of initiation, they are known as shovelheads because they got hit in the head. But looking at it from another perspective, vampires are no longer breathing, so clawing their way out of the dirt is probably quite difficult, but not as terrifying once they realize they are undead. And because vampires are stronger than humans, than Cain, because they can enhance their strength with their blood, this ritual is somewhat easy. It's quite horrifying, but it's quite practical for a vampire to claw his or her way out of the dirt on the tomb. So the Sabbat follow a certain religious order or method to their madness. They have modeled many of their traditions after Catholic traditions. In fact, they even have like a ritual where they drink blood from other vampires from a cup. It's quite usual for, in fact, you consider it the Sabbat norm to become bonded or attached to other members, or bound through rituals of blood, of drinking the other vampire's blood, because this makes them somewhat dependent or reliant on a more mystical sense between each other. You actually get a description of the entire process later on in the book. And the Sabbat have followed this somewhat old code, the Code of Milan, where it's basically a way where a code that demands complete loyalty to the members of the Sabbat, that betrayal is punishable by death, and that the Sabbat must tattletale anyone who is unloyal or has some bad intentions towards the Sabbat. So the Sabbat at the same time feels somewhat like a contradiction, because they offer complete freedom to do what they want upon mortals and other vampires that go against the objectives of the Sabbat, but at the same time they demand complete obedience and loyalty to the Sabbat. So we have information on their practices and their rituals, because the core of the Sabbat is being a member of a pack of predators that are bound by this vinculum that I was telling you, by drinking the other vampires or the other members of the Sabbat's blood. The Camarilla views the Sabbat as demon worshippers, but this is not the most accurate description. That there are some other clans that are more under following that line of thought, but they consider them. The Camarilla considers the Sabbat to be true villains, and this is coming from monsters that from the Camarilla. So it's you can see that the Camarilla simply does not have a good opinion of the Sabbat and on their views on the Gehenna. And the Anarchs, they feel somewhat related, or you could say identified with the Sabbat in their pursuit of freedom, but they do not, they are not so enthusiastic about they get too trapped in their violence and their religious rites. And the Independents consider the Sabbat to be quite dangerous, but still clients, like dangerous clients. So they won't abandon an opportunity to carry out business with them, if it is possible. Now, when it comes to the Anarch movement within the Camarilla, these are mostly younger vampires that do not like that the elders who have been ruling for hundreds, if not thousands of years, well, not thousands, probably the oldest vampire is 1,500 years. I haven't checked, but they have been ruling for a long time. And so the young ones do not like this, and they also see opportunities in modern knights to take advantage of the anachronisms of the older vampires to seize that power from the Camarilla. So the Anarchs want to change everything completely, but they are not always successful in their endeavors, because all of the Anarchs have different ideas of how things should be carried out. They want to change the system completely, but they never agree on a specific plan. So the strength of the Anarchs lies in their passion and in their quick actions. They do not talk for days about what they're going to do. Sometimes they decide to do things on the spur of the moment, and they do deal some damage to the structure, kind of like fighting the man or the vampire in this case. And but when they try to create something more on the long term, that's when they get somewhat confused, and they don't reach agreements or terms that are more profitable for the Anarchs as a sect. So the Anarchs are always looking for that opportunity, and they want to establish more barons, which are kind of like Anarch leaders. And even though, as I was telling you, even though this sect is made out of younger vampires, there are some older vampires that were never too happy with the traditional structure of the Camarilla, and they actually help the Anarchs openly or behind the curtains with different resources, power, and information, until the Anarchs reach this status perfectus, or the perfect state as they call it, in which they achieve some sort of Camarilla utopia. Maybe it won't be called the Camarilla once they reach that state. Maybe it will be something completely different. So what the Anarchs lack in organization, they make up for it in their energy, enthusiasm, and quick actions. The Anarch sect is very well supported by Onyx Path Publishing. They have released 2 or 3 books, if I'm not mistaken, that have more on their agendas, their plans, some non-player characters. So if you want to follow that line of stories, I think this is one of the best moments to engage into that because of the additional material. So you have information on the practices of the Anarchs. They're actually quite quite chaotic and not taken as seriously because of that, because they engage in many games and pranks. For example, while the Camarilla carry out different gatherings that are quite sophisticated and refined, and the Sabbat have these like blood sports where sometimes members of the Sabbat actually die, and they consider them like a test for the fittest or strongest vampires to survive. The Anarchs carry out games where they actually like play tag, shooting at each other. Obviously, this would be quite insane if they were humans, but because they are vampires, they can take the damage and tag your it, you got shot. They play like that, and they even carry out pranks. Some Anarchs actually like get in the way of a car and they get hit by the car, and then they get up as if they were zombies just to scare humans or kind. But and this worries the elders of the Camarilla quite a bit, because they think that this could endanger the masquerade, and that's true. So the Camarilla, they see them like they are perhaps unruly children, or destabilizing influence that could be a greater problem. And the Sabbat are also feel a bit identified with the Anarchs, but because the Anarchs are not focused completely on Gehenna and on being like a religious cult, the Sabbat will not join with them, of course. And they just consider them like potential recruits. And when it comes to the independents, they are not exactly sure of the Anarchs, because they are like the most trustworthy customers or allies. So the independents have like a mixed opinion of them. Now let's talk about the independents. Later on in part 5 of my review, I'm going to talk about each of the clans separately, but the independents are basically separate clans that wanted to stay out of the jihad, although that's quite impossible. No matter how hard you try to stay out of the jihad, in one way or another you're actually participating in it. But nonetheless, you have the Assamites, the followers of Set, the Giovanni, and the Ravnos. So the independents decided to stay out of the conflict. Some of them have actually made promises to the Camarilla or the Sabbat that they won't get involved in the jihad. But of course, that's just speaking of the clans, about the clans in a general sense. A lot of members of the clans, of the independent clans, don't care about such promises, and they actually lend their services, perhaps as mercenaries for any of the sects. So the independents are wild cards. Their help or the problems that they cause could tip the outcome of the jihad either way. It all depends on how the independents participate on the outskirts of the jihad. Now let's talk about each of these independents in a more somewhat summarized sense. You have the Assamites. Now the Assamites are a clan of murderous vampires. They are also quite religious. They call themselves the children of Hakim. And in their religion, they must kill anyone who is not a child of Hakim. They follow the laws of Hakim. There's a small number of Assamites who do not follow this, but their general religion dictates that they do that they carry out such assassinations and even diablerie. That is, they drink the blood of other vampires to become stronger when they are of a lower generation than them. So the Assamites are somewhat untrustworthy, although because they're always looking to kill those that they consider sinners and infidels, and they want to become stronger by drinking the blood of lower generation vampires, you could probably convince them of eliminating a political rival. And sometimes, if the rival is of the really low generation, the Assamite will take that mission, giving their clients discounts, or even if it's it could be completely free if they get enough information and resources to carry out the deed. And then we have the followers of Set, and they feel like sort of like an Egyptian cult. Their objective is to resurrect Set. Yes, that Set from the Egyptian tradition. They carry out all sorts of mysterious and unknowable ceremonies and rituals. They feel quite separate from other vampires. Some view the followers of Set as the typical devil offering a deal in exchange for different things. But this could be applied to another clan of vampires that I will talk about in some other parts of my reviews. So the followers of Set, they know many, you could say, secrets that other clans simply do not have access to. Some that are quite magical, and some that are more focused or follow serpent style. Many of their disciplines have to do with snakes and charming others. So many do not trust the followers of Set. They see them like some sort of Egyptian demons. And then we have the Giovanni. The Giovanni want to become the most powerful when it comes to knowledge of necromancy, and they also want to become the most rich and the ones with the more influence both in Cainite and the mortal world. And vampires need them because the Giovanni are probably the only clan that can help you when you get into trouble with some entities from the realms of the dead. They promised the Camarilla that they wouldn't get into the jihad, and the Camarilla would stay out of their affairs. But the Giovanni, they do not always keep their word. When they can, and if it's profitable for them, they will lend their services to the highest bidder. And if they get caught in the act, they could lie their way out of it, or use all of their resources to prove their innocence. So the Giovanni are those vampires that other clans and sects usually look for when they have problems with wraiths and ghosts and such beings. But that doesn't mean that the Giovanni are well liked. It's just that they are so self-sufficient and resourceful. And then we have the Ravnos. Now the Ravnos, they feel a bit like gypsies. They are masters of illusion and they have a quick wit. But their primary allegiance is to themselves, not even to their clans at times. The Ravnos are highly independent in their objectives and plans. They are always looking out for each other individually. They have no loyalty to the clan whatsoever. Some of them could be loyal, but most of them are always thinking about what they want at the expense of everything else. In fact, they are quite prone to vices such as gambling or drinking from people that are under the influence of drugs and such. So the Ravnos, at times, because they move around everywhere and they are quite streetwise, it could be worth it to have a few of them as allies. But because they are masters of illusion, most vampires do not bother trying to keep them away or out from their own realms or cities, because the Ravnos could be more trouble and they are worth. It's better to have them around, and perhaps they will give you some information depending on the conflicts of the jihad. But they are highly distrusted as well. Not as much perhaps as the followers of Set, but they are still considered some of the most untrustworthy vampires. And the Camarilla views the independence as something out of place, and they know that the independents cannot stand against the Camarilla on their own, but they are still resourceful enough to shift the balance of things. And the Sabbat find the independents like a bit of a mockery, that puppets that do not know that they are still puppets. So they don't have the highest opinions of the independents. And the Anarchs actually like the way some independents get around, but because there are so many untrustworthy vampires within the independents, like the Ravnos and the followers of Set and the Giovanni, that they feel somewhat mercenary, the Anarchs do not trust them. And so this is a general view of the different sects. Next time, when I have the time, I will prepare the part 5 of my review, where we are going to talk about each of the clans, and this is going to be a very exciting part, because pretty much every Vampire the Masquerade player loves the archetypes and sometimes the stereotypes that come into being when you create a vampire of a particular clan. So I hope you will watch that part of my review, and I hope you enjoyed this part. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.